Elections?
What am I mentioning?
Elections, so we get people
Oh,
to
you're
know they're
right. I
coming
meant to
up
put that in
shortly.
there. That was supposed to be in there. It's rushing, but
It's all
yeah,
good.
tell everybody to soon expect uh, their ballots, their opportunity to vote for the board members. Send that out. And right now it's 10:01. I'll wait till oh 10:03 or so, and then I'll start. But I'll just be discussing what you see up there on the screen.
I think it stopped rotating.
No, it didn't. Maybe it did, because you made me start talking about it, and I touched it
You
when I was talking
touched
about the
it.
picture. So it's all very delicate. So 11 total. That's not too bad, but like I said, I'll give it another minute or so. Mm. Fading into view now.
There you are.
Say shoes insert, shirt. Shows I get service. Yeah. All right. I think that it's 10:03. I think I'll get started. And I'd like to welcome everybody to our Libertyville Chapter of Armor May meeting. Today's May 18th, as you can see there on the screen. And ooh, things are moving a little quickly there. Today's meeting and it's the last meeting of the season, and we're going to have Jeff Fisher. He's going to be speaking with us today about cloud-based records and information management strategies. And I also want to let you know it's our last event of the year, but not of the year rather, but of the season. But next month, New Jersey Inform Conference, always a fantastic event. It rivals our national conferences. That'll be June 6th, 2023. So if you're interested, sign up for that. And our next meeting won't be until September 2024. But we don't, and read that there. We'd like to thank you for those of you who attended our virtual and our live seminars. We'd like to thank you. And next year, there'll be a few more. We're hoping to have you participate in our 2023 and 24 programs. If you have ideas for speakers, topics, let us know. And we'd like to, have more participation, of course. And for those of you out there who are not members of Libertyville, please join. And so also expect in the next upcoming weeks to have ballots sent to you. We're going to be, or access to ballots. They'll be up on our website. They'll be for board member positions. So if you'd like to join the board, you can do that also, but we'll send it out to you and let you know about the elections that are coming up. Because we could always use more help and more input from our members. If you see something in an area, you say, hey, I think I could help with that. You see something that, not necessarily lacking, but something you think would need more attention. We'd like your input on the board. So I think I'm done talking now, and I'm going to turn the things over to Mr. Fisher. I'm going to share screens, and if you have questions, just send them directly to Hutch, to me in the chat, and we'll get started. As I said, that Jeff holds a Master of Computer Information Science from LaSalle University, and outside of working for innovative development, he is an adjunct professor at Bucks County Community College. So right now, I'm going to turn it over. Jeff, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to stop sharing now, and it's up to you. Come on in. Hopefully everything's going to work. I'll let you know when we can see you.
So,
Oh, perfect.
there we go. Oh, and it worked.
It worked. Sure did.
Well, no. The moving of the
Oh,
was
that is
not
pretty.
working previously.
That's pretty fancy.
So, all right. So as Hutch said, if you have questions, just put them in chat and we'll address them at the end. Okay. All right. All right. So we're going to do a little Q&A session throughout the meeting. It's all confidential. It's just, you're going to text in question. I have some pre-planned questions to kind of gauge where you're at in the cloud world versus, non-cloud world. And then I'm going to go through what is cloud native architecture and then where records management fits in with what's already available natively from out in the cloud. Okay. And you'll see that there's a lot of great stuff in these service providers that are out there. And we'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about, moving through it. This is what's available from a cloud point and some of the challenges too. We'll get to some of them at the end. Earlier in the month, we posted a white paper. Myself and 3 other guys worked on it, and it's a holistic framework on the cloud native computing and architecture is the title of it. And we took a whole view of what does it mean to move an application to the cloud. And that was our whole goal, right? It was like, because you start talking to clients and you realize, well, you forgot a big piece here. You don't have this secure, right? It's like the CISO and the CTO and the CIO never talk. They don't even know who each other is, right? So we took that as kind of like an opening for ourselves to kind of say, what's going on out there? And there's a lot of good articles, but none of them looked at it holistically. So that's what we did. Okay. All right. So now if you go to your mobile device, you can text 22333. The message is going to be Mark Portner, who's my associate, who's an associate at Innovative Development, and 938. And we can go to that. Let me, oops. There we go. So you could also go to pollev.com. Okay. And our first question today is, what industry do you work in? Everybody works in legal. Oh, from healthcare. Good. I guess that's everyone. All right. So we've got a lot of people in legal and healthcare, which in the Philadelphia area kind of makes sense, right? Kind of what we do here. All right. So the next question, and software tech. Okay, good, good. Our next question is, what cloud service provider does your company employ? What do they, should be employee, not employee. So none, AWS, Microsoft, Oracle. Okay. All right. AWS and Microsoft are the most common, so that makes sense. Okay. All right, we've got 3 more questions later on, but we'll get started here. So your company sits there, your organization sits there and says, okay, we're going to go and make a cloud native architecture, and we're going to take this application that we have running in a data center somewhere, and it's a cloud-based system, and we're going to move it to the cloud and make it cloud native. Well, a lot of things go on when that happens with the data, right? So the storage locations all change. A lot of the requirements are going to change with that. You know, you're now going to have to reevaluate, you know, your whole records management plan, right? And you know, it's a refresh. Now, if they're going to sit there and say, we're going to take and build a new application because we're taking the organization in a new way, or we need to build this application because we don't have anything for it. And that kind of gets down to, I don't know if anyone has read Tim Schultz's book, A Seat at the Table. He says it's always better to build than buy is the real decision. Because if you build it, it fits your company's needs and it's flexible to your company and can guide you to the best practices of the way you work. So knowing that and working with that, you know, what are your records that you're trying to save? How are you managing them? How are you disposing of them? And how are you monitoring them? We know this, but I just wanted to make sure that we kind of had a little review there so we can tie it in with cloud native. So the real benefits, and this is not just from records management, but overall reason why organizations are moving to cloud native. First off, compliance. AWS, Microsoft have really spent a lot of time that if you're in a region, you know, the United States, Poland, Jakarta, wherever you're at, right? That location has rules, and those rules need to be followed with data privacy, data concerns, right? Whatever they are. So they spent a lot of time making sure that they built that in for that region. And that's really key for us if some of us work for small companies, large companies, you know, data flows between borders. How does that all work? Well, those companies spend a lot of time to make sure they're compliant with the local rules, and we'll just call them regions or states or countries, right? Work with that. Second thing is there's demand peaks and times where the application or services are not being used at all. And if it's not being used, a key thing in cloud native architecture is it's serverless. And if it's serverless, then if it's not being used, you're not being billed for it. That means there's nothing running at that point in time. And that means it's got to be able to be run. But you may have a component that when it gets called upon again and again and again. So one of the things we can think of is you've got an accounting group, and the first person gets in at 7 a.m. in the morning, and there's one instance running. At 8 a.m., you now have 12 people in, and there's 3 instances of it running. And by instances, I mean like that module of the application that's being called over and over and over again is in use, and it has multiple instances of it are being called. Right at 9 a.m., you now have the whole department working. It's 35 people working, and you've got, I forget what the number I said last was, but let's say 9 instances working. So it is scaled up to multiple instances running so that it scales and you're only paying for what's running at that point in time. So the other key factor in going cloud native is resiliency. When things go wrong, what are the paths of logic that are being used that are set up so that if there's a failure, that no one notices that there's a failure. There's a hardware failure, there's a routing error, routing, you know, through the network, something happens. things stay resilient. It's able to work, no problem, no glitches. Teams get reorganized into Agile DevOps, DevSecOps teams, and they are quickly able to adapt to change. And I didn't really focus on this in today's presentation. That's something, you know, you can download the white paper and read about, okay? But how we work and how we can quickly respond is important, okay? Moving from a data center with your cloud, with your client server application to AWS or Microsoft or Oracle, companies average, according to the Gartner Group, Forrester, CIO magazine, it's somewhere between 30 and 35%. Moving to cloud native with that same application, you cut your cost down by another 30%, according to Forrester and Gartner Group. So that's a big savings for organizations to underhold. So you can see why, you know, this goes on, right? And why we're moving in this direction and the directions that things are going in, right? So here's the big slide. And I'm going to go over definitionally what cloud native architecture is for you, okay? And then we're going to move back into how it benefits records management. So you're going to have to bear with me because it's kind of a bulky, you know, slide here, right? But think of it this way first. We had a mainframe. Then we moved the client server in buildings that we hosted, right? We had our client server, and you know, you had that room with it was super air conditioned, and you had the Freon in it or whatever that chemical was that if it caught on fire, it would douse everything, right? Then we sat there and said, well, that's not really the smartest move. Let's move that to a data center and have it hosted, right? And then we moved to having it hosted in a data center and everything's a VM. And then we had the VMs, we moved everything that was there to a cloud application that's running on VMs. And now we moved it to a cloud provider, still running on VMs. And from there, we're sitting there saying, okay, well, now we're going to re-architect the whole thing. We're going to use all the services that this cloud provider provides us, whether it's Azure AD, whether it's AWS, IBM, Oracle's OCI, whatever it is, that's where we're moving to, right? And you can see the progression here, right? We know history says, and I don't know what's next, by the way, but we can see that history is moving us in this direction, right? So as we do that, we have to sit there and say, well, what is it? And then how do we adopt it, right? Okay. So first, let's look at the platform level, right? Because, you know, as we went through, you know, client server and a data center, that's a platform, right? So what's the cloud native architecture platform? It's the ability to run applications in modern dynamic environments, such as private, public, and hybrid clouds. And here's a key part of this is that if it's a public cloud, it's accessible over the internet to anyone, right? The ARMA website, accessible to everyone. Or is it your organization? So, you know, the innovative development back-end stuff where, you know, I save my files, right? That's private, right? Or is it a combination of both where you can go in and log in from the private one, but now you're in the private sector of it. It's a hybrid, right? So that's a key thing, right? So we work in all these different environments. So what is the application itself? Well, it's a bunch of microservices, declarative APIs, right? It's and a service mesh or API gateway. What goes on there, which is really nice, is we now take these big applications and we make them into these small, unique services. I'm going to register to the ARMA event on June 6th. And that might have a microservice behind it. It's not one big app. It just has register here. So it might be a web page and a REST service. And that's it. It's not very complicated. So it enables us to do things in a small manner, but you might have the whole website that goes over registering, the ticketing that goes on, the list that gets produced, all those other things, the entire website, but this is just the one aspect of it. Every microservice is just manages one atomic thing, okay? And that's key. Next, we talk about build and that immutable infrastructure, right? Oop, what happened there? Okay. That immutable infrastructure, right? In order to get things to be scalable, right? To get things to be resilient, we have to build things in development, test, stage, prod, all the way the same. And then the only tweaks is what goes on within that infrastructure, right? So in order to do that, we containerize things, Kubernetes, okay? And a lot of that stuff enables us to build things across these environments. And once it's built and I have a container and I get that demand that we were talking about as people come in, accountants come into work, as that goes there, the container, which is the application itself, gets replicated over and over and over again, okay? And that enables us to scale, right? And that scale is the increasing of computing capacity to match the demand of the users, okay? Together, this creates a loosely coupled system, right? There's the registration system, there's the system that takes care of the checkout of the cart, there's the system that takes care of the list of, oh, who's all the attendees, all of those things occur, okay? So that's loosely coupled, but they can call one another, but they're just, you know, coupled together, right? And it's all manageable, you know, through agility, right? And it's all observable. And observable is where we're going to take this, and then we're going to look at how our data that we've created is observable, okay? And we'll do that in this slide here, okay? So on my left-hand side, I've got my application, right? And it doesn't matter what all these things are. It's just a basic, you know, prototype of an application, and it doesn't really matter, right? But that application creates data. It creates log files, messages, metrics. There's configuration information for it for all the environments it's in. There's documents that we created to create the application. There's lists of things to do or lists of things that gets created from it, right? All of that's ingested and put somewhere. So from that, we're able to evaluate that data and see where the data brings us, right? And AWS and Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, Google, they all have similar tools, okay? They all have it. So it's just a matter of investigating it and getting a little bit involved in their tool set, okay? The first tool we'll talk about is CloudTrail. All log files, all of your APIs, all those microservices, all that service mesh, it collects data and it puts it into CloudTrail in a immutable database. You know, it's worm, write once, read many format. So then you can sit there and go through, you can audit, do your compliance monitoring, you can find out who has access to what, why they have access to different things, all that good stuff, right? CloudTrail saves the API events for us so that we can go through and do analysis. CloudWatch is similar. Oh, and CloudWatch has a dashboard and you can run queries against it. CloudWatch does the same thing, but it's in real time. So you can see where the hardware failures are at. If there's vulnerabilities that are going on right now, you can start to get some of that data from that, right? You can look at the event data as it's happening, right? So you know what's going on in the application, okay? The systems manager looks at your whole platform, everything that you've designed in, say, in AWS, and sits there and says, here's all of the applications that work, and here's all the things that are going here. Here's my inventory. Here's my AIM, my identity access management, and who has access to what things and how's it working, right? So that gives you that sense, right? Now we get to the two big tools, OpenSearch and Forecast. And this is where, as records management people, you're going to want to make sure that your output on the left, on the far right-hand side here, what's going on with the applications? Are they following the data rules that we laid out? Is the security practices in place? Are the data retention plans being followed? Are the data rules that we set up being followed? All that great stuff. Are we doing it? Are we compliant? Are we following the regulatory rules? Well, OpenSearch, powerful analytic engine, enables organizations to process and analyze vast amounts of data. I'm talking terabytes of data, right? It's not meant for the 2 gig thing. Like, you got terabytes of data here that you can now look at. Okay, and it's easy to find these things. You get good data visualizations from it. You're able to really find what's going on, right? And you could do it over, however long your data is all the data you have, or just, one application's data for the last 6 months, whatever you set up the criteria for. So what does this help us with, right? So we can ensure compliance and privacy regulations are being handled and managed. We can tie, our data being stored appropriately. Okay. OpenSearch allows you to define and reinforce retention schedules, automatically deleting or archiving data as necessary. So it's not just search, it's search and act, which is really good. You can also build your retention policies in all of your storage cycles as well. There's, S3 buckets and, S3 Glacier buckets for things that, are really old data, right? So you've got all those different things. You can go through your user permissions and access controls and get reports out of it. Like, Hutch has access to 36 APIs. Hutch doesn't work in those departments anymore. We got to move and get rid of Hutch's access to this stuff. You can reveal that stuff that's going on. Sorry, Hutch, got to pick on you a little. Right?
That's okay.
Yeah. Little data governance, robust data governance framework so that you can build that data quality management, metadata management involved. Okay. Amazon Forecast. So they were just some of the use cases. There's, you go to Amazon OpenSearch service, and it's got like a whole inventory of use cases. I just gave you ones that I thought were most appropriate here. Okay. Amazon Forecast uses machine language and artificial intelligence to analyze your data and accurately predict some trends that they're seeing, right? Define gaps of your policies and your rules and your regulations to sit there and say, oh, you've got a problem here. Or there's being proposed that records retention is no longer going to be 7 years, it's going to be 8 years. Well, what are the policies that changes that you need to make? You can go analyze your systems to go find that out, right? And find out, well, if that rule passes, we need to make these changes, right? And that's probably not the best example, but you understand what I'm saying. From this regular monitoring and accessing of forecasts for compliance and internal policies, you'll be able to implement reporting mechanisms to generate compliance reports, right? Regulatory compliance as well as non-regulatory compliance. Okay, so for the people in the pharma industry, you may be able to set this up and analyze all the data that you use to make drug, and then sit there and say, here's all of our reports, and save you time, effort, and energy, right? There's also a whole thing that gets down to, in the machine learning world, of auto classification of unstructured data. So we always like our data classified. It may not come to us classified. So it's either a manual effort, but from Amazon Forecast, you're able to find that data and then classify it. Okay. Big thing here, compliance with regulatory regulations, HIPAA, GRDP, financial, healthcare, whatever they are. Amazon has spent, and so has IBM, a lot of time baking that in so that it's easier for us as end users to find those rules and then put them in place so that the applications teams don't have to be complete SMEs in everything. Okay. Another good thing here is when you find things that aren't there, you're going to find trends. you know what, we don't emphasize this area of how we input data for telephone numbers is not consistent with international numbers. We have to be consistent across all of our applications. We don't follow good WCAG accessibility standards. So we're going to have to, train people on that. So the last thing is you can use the forecast to find out areas where your employees need to be trained outside of your group. Okay. Now we're going to move to question 3. Okay, it's active. Do you currently use a document management application? If so, what do you use? By the way, I strategically put the question, so I got to get a little water, okay? I manage. Okay. Let's go to the next question here. What are your organization's key goals for records management in 23, 24? Since we're halfway through the year, you might already, and if you work for the government, you probably are wrapping up the year because it ends the end of September. So wow. Data retention policies, getting it in place. So for the people that responded with Microsoft, Azure AD, and Amazon, depending on how you configure their, in Amazon, it's called S3 buckets, you can have a retention plan, and they call it intelligent archiving. So after it's, you sit there and say records are used consistently for 2 years, and then they start to not be used as much, right? So for 2 years, it's in active, highly active mode. Then they move it to an intelligent tier so that it's on call immediately, but we know that this data is not going to be touched as much. Then you can move it to the glacier, let's say after 5 years, it's really never really used again. So you build those things into it. So, which is good to know. Okay. So good stuff there. And I forget what Microsoft calls there off the top of my head. I'm AWS certified. I really should go and do the Microsoft one as well, but there's only so many things you can do with your free time, right? Okay, so as you all well know that your architects are your key to figuring out what's going to happen next and moving to the next and implementing the next solution, right? And in there's a couple things that we want to talk about, right? We want to make sure that they understand what records need to be managed, right? The personal identifiable information, SOX, GRDP, HIPAA, you know, all the regulatory things, right? The credit card processing, you know, HCI, right? We want to make sure that's being handled, right? And that we have the appropriate solution for each type of record. And then we get into telemetry and observability, right? We want to work with them, right? With the telemetry and observability. Couple things here, right? Telemetry really is about the collecting and transmitting of data from remote devices and systems. Observability is the practices of monitoring and analyzing observable signals to gain insights and functionality of a health system, the health of a system, right? Telemetry focuses on data collection and transmission. Observability, understand and optimize the system's performance, right? A good example of telemetry is you've got a weather station and you're collecting the temperature, the humidity, the wind speed, all that good stuff, right? Then you take that data and you transmit it to, you know, home base, the server that's there. And from that data, it's stored, right? Observability sits there and says, oh, let me pick up that data and find out what's going on. But not just that data, right? Observability really gets down to finding where the observable signals, all of it could identify bottlenecks, user experience issues, if it has a user experience, security vulnerabilities, allowing them to make appropriate actions and maintain the website's performance, right? So that's a key thing there, and you know, the two will work together a lot. Okay, next up is security. How are we protecting things, right? It always gets back to where's our data? How did we protect it, right? Right. The other thing is testing for compliance, right? You start working with an application team. Do they have test scripts, you know, automated test scripts that test to make sure that the data that's going in is correct, not just positive ones, the negative ones. We don't want bad data in, right? We only want good data. Okay. And next is always training. How do we manage to train people so that they can go and do the next thing? Okay. And as I stated before, we will talk about challenges, and the big challenges are for going to cloud native with records management get down to three things. Security, right? Cloud native architectures, more complex. You've got all these microservices and they're tied together loosely. So the security for them becomes a key thing. How can we manage that security with them? How do we work all that out? And that can be difficult at times and challenging, okay? But it's done because you have your private virtual cloud little box that you're working in, and you make sure that how it works gets secure, right? Data sovereignty, as much as Microsoft and AWS have put together to make things work, there's always ways to go around the rules unless the rules are strictly enforced with security, right? That's a key thing. Once you start building a serverless network, cloud native network within your application, within a vendor, you're using their tools, right? You're using their tools. So you're using their services. And the more you use their services, the more you're locked in. And your application may use 40 or 50 services to work appropriately, you know, between security and data and, you know, the whole thing, right? I'll give you one example. In AWS, you have a Lambda, which fires off a set of code, right? An event happens and a set of code happens. Maybe it renders a web page and ties it to an API, a REST service, right? The code will work in Microsoft's Azure AD under its functions most of the time. You may have to change, right? Your JavaScript may have to change a little bit. Your REST service may have to change a little bit. The same goes for if you go to Google's platform, they have functions, what they call Google functions, and the same type of thing. An event happens, it fires the code. The code may have to be changed to work within Google's environment. So just be aware of that if you're not tied in with a master service agreement with one of the big vendors at the time for something, okay? All right, to summarize, cloud native architecture lends itself nicely to records management. There's a nice tie-in between the two of them, right? Policy and compliance are configurable. And we'll talk through some of that. There's tools. I went through the 5 main tools that AWS provides. Microsoft has similar. I've seen them. I have not worked with them, however, but they're out there, right? And you can build records compliance from the beginning, which is always good. And I think that takes us to our last question, and then we'll go through questions, right? From today's presentation, can moving to the cloud, and particularly cloud native, help your organization achieve its 2023 goals? Okay, got a yes. Yay. One more minute here. I think that's everyone. Okay, so if you use your mobile device, just type in leave now.
This is Hutch. Yes, we do have some questions here.
Okay.
And let's see. Let's start. I think, well, I'll just say something. I think this was a good education for records managers because a lot of these things are going on around us. And we may not have all, I mean, there's definitely some vocabulary and concepts that not every one of us, knows right now or grasp right now.
Okay.
A lot of this is it's some kind of, it's technical. Are there any good resources, let's say, for like, I know, primers or anything to help records managers bone up or really know the questions to ask and how things are working with
Sure.
either system and any of these cloud systems?
Yeah. Oracle, IBM, Microsoft, and Azure all have what they call the Essentials course. And it's really meant for anyone that's in IT, or maybe you're a product owner on the business side, to understand the technology. And it's at the 500,000 foot, 5,000 foot view, right? And you don't have to take the test afterwards, but it goes over it in very easy to understand terminology, and their videos, right? And then you answer 2 questions at the end and you move to the next video. And most of them are, 3 to 5 hours worth of entertainment. So, it's something you can do on your lunch hour in the course of a week.
And that would be good for records managers also.
Yes. Yeah. And
okay.
It goes through the basic terms of, if you're an Amazon, AWS, it goes over what are the S3 buckets, what are microservices, what are API, all those good things. How do we do GRDP? How do we scale? How are things resilient? It goes through that in a very nice and simple fashion. The Microsoft one goes over it as well. It's meant for beginners. It's meant for people that
Right.
aren't in IT already, you know?
See, I have another question. Thank you very much. If you build retention policies, do they run automatically? Or do
Yes.
they notify someone that something's about to happen so it can be approved?
You would have to build a Lambda to notify you to then well, sorry, you'd have to build that functionality. You'd have to build that in, okay? Yeah, and that you would do from open search would probably be the best way to manage that through, right? Get it, you know, you do the search that sits there and says, here's all the records that are going to be uh, disposed of in 10 days time. Please accept the action that this is going to occur. You say yes, great. You say no, I'm going to ping you again in a month. You're going to have to write that
Okay.
script.
Thank you. I see another question here. How does adopting a cloud native architecture impact long-term preservation and accessibility of electronic records?
Sure, that's
Considering the evolving nature of technology and potential vendor lock-in.
right. So that's almost a whole presentation into itself. But what I'll say is this: you're going to go and you're going to look at your data portability, right? How am I going to move my data from my, you know, just like you did from going back to the beginning and looking at the records management plan, where you moved from your data center to your cloud provider. Now you're looking at your cloud provider and you're going to look at, create a plan to move offwards, right? So what's my portability of my data, right? What are my standards that I've got to follow to go do those things? Who owns what data at what point in time and in what control factor, right? What's my preservation plan? We'll go through again. You know, you'd have to go through that. And where are my audits at? You know, how am I going to audit in this new world again, right? So it's back to the beginning for the change.
Wow. This is it's a lot to consider. I mean, is there a lot of movement right now between cloud systems, or are people kind of staying where they are? I mean, or is it too new for people to go running to some other vendor?
So the multi-cloud phenomenon goes on because let's say you move everything to AWS, and what you realize is, well, I have an application that's a .NET application, and it's uses SQL Server. It might run better in Microsoft Azure AD. Well, they do some testing and some prototyping and say, you know what, that does run better over there, and it's more costly. It's less costly to go run it over there, right? So we should go move it over there. And then you've got this hybrid cloud. So things work that way. With the cloud native architecture, there's not enough companies that are cloud native yet. There are enough applications that are cloud native yet to start worrying about the portability and the moving between them. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I have another question. Considering a scenario like a move of file share content to a cloud-based operation, do you have any suggested approaches that a firm might take?
Hutch, you want to read that again?
Yeah. If you're looking at a scenario like a move of a file shares content to cloud-based operations, do you have any suggested approaches a firm might take?
Sure. When I was at my last client, ETS, we moved all of the file shares that were in the data store over to AWS FXS, right? And we did trial and error at first, and then what we did, we moved like 100 gig, and then see how we accessed it, see how you would how you have your X drive. Well, then what's the X drive look like when you get to it from AWS? Well, you don't really go to your file explorer, you go to this website that looks like OneDrive, right? And then from there, how do you maneuver and get things back and forth? And what adapters do you need and what security is set up for it? So once you go through kind of the architecture of it and the prototype, then you sit there and say, okay, now we can do those things. And the big challenge that we had was access databases. Excel files, you could do the linking back and forth between Excel files. You just had to relink them and it worked perfectly. Access databases were a little bit more challenging because of the way that they do their interoperability. Okay, but we figured that out as well. I can't remember off the top of my head what we did, but I do remember that there was a guidelines out there, okay, for that. Okay, that's a good question because that's going to be happening a lot because a lot of these files that are out there are oh, we've made that Excel file and for year-end reporting in 2013, and it's still out there because it's a good example.
I've got, oh, here we go. Let's say, how do these services respond to subpoenas? Because that, that information is now really out of that client's hands, like it's out of the law firm or whatever hands, and they don't have that control over it anymore. And now it's, AWS, whoever has it. And so, I mean, do the subpoenas come directly to, let's say, AWS? How do things like that come about?
Yeah. So you could put a legal hold on a set of information. There are ways to make it read only. And you would then sit there and say, well, this data is only accessed by these people and, the legal department. So there is a chain of custody because all the data that's saved, all that is recorded in your cloud trail, your AWS cloud trail. And I don't know the tool that Microsoft uses, but I do know that they have that too, because one of my other coworkers manages with that. So there are ways to, safely secure data and put it to the side. And I do know that companies are also now, when they do, they'll encapsulate these things in EnCase, they'll store it up in the cloud until they're needed for presentation. Okay.
See, and one more question. You're AWS certified and not Azure certified, right?
Yes, but
Do you see, is one better than the other, you think?
well, hold on. I AWS certified, yes. I've worked more in Azure.
Ah.
I went through an ETS. We moved their platform, some of their platform went to AWS, but their identity and access management tool for internal users is Azure AD, and that's what we just finished in March.
Okay.
So I'm more practiced in one than the other, which is kind of funny, when you think about it, right? But it's just the way things worked out. So is one better than the other? There are pros and cons to each service provider. AWS has a bazillion tools and people get lost in the woods of, I'm trying to do this and I thought this was the right tool. So you really need to be studied on what you're trying to do in AWS, which is why I went through those 5 tools and I kind of gave you the blurb about each one of them and why you might use it, because you might sit there and say, well, I just need CloudTrail. Well, you might need CloudTrail if you're just looking for specifics. You might need OpenSearch if you're looking for those specifics and with a more aggregated level or more finite level, right? So you've got to judge back and forth. Microsoft has less tools that have more capabilities, but it's more costly. And you sign a contract with Microsoft and all of a sudden they sit there, and this was in the papers back in February, they raised their prices on everybody. And CFOs around the world are ready to throttle their CIO, right? You know, you've got to keep the finances of what it's going to cost you to operate consistent, right? And all of a sudden you've got a new bill and you're like, I need more money for because you don't look good, right? Well, you signed a contract. Oh, so they can do that, you know, and they did. IBM, consistent, but they're a small player. They don't have all the resources that the other two have. Oracle, you know, if you're an Oracle database house, Oracle can really be your answer, right? They have a lot of good chatbot tools and a lot of call center tools. So if you're like a collection agency, that would fit in nicely, right? Or if you have a lot of Oracle forms, right? Google, I want to get rid of everything I have. I'm going to Google and I'm going to use their tools and I'm going to streamline all my processes. Okay. There's the use case for that. Now, all of our companies are all a little bit different and our landscapes are different and how we use things work differently, right? So Hutch, to answer your question, what you're trying to do, right?
I gotcha. Understood. Well, thank you very much. That was super informative. We took up just about our whole hour. That was fantastic. I think we do have a comment down there, I think in the chat that went out to everybody. Yeah, from Mark. Yeah, that was super informative. And we'd like to thank you very much. You know,
thank you.
I think that was great. It's something I definitely have to read up on if I was ever going to, you know, attempt anything like this. And you know, it's always good to keep track of what your IT is doing, what they're doing with stuff, you know, and try to have some understanding of it. That was really, really good.
Okay.
So I will go back and go to my screen. Stop sharing there. And I'm back to here. All right, everybody. Let me see if I can change that. I'd like to thank everybody very much for attending. And like I said, this is our last meeting of not the year, but of the season. And on behalf of the board, we'd like to thank you very much for attending. Be on the lookout for ballot information for the elections that are coming up. And if you're not a member of the chapter, please join. All right, so I think I'm going to end everything for everybody. Once again, Jeff, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for attending.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. We appreciate your time.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.